The Magic of Reality. How we know what's really true. Richard Dawkins. Chapter 2. Who was the first person? Most of the chapters in this book are headed by a question, and my purpose is to answer the question, or at least give the best possible answer, which is the answer of science. But I shall usually begin with some mystical answers because they are colorful and interesting, and real people have believed them. Some people still do. All peoples around the world have origin myths to account for where they came from. Many tribal origin myths talk only about one particular tribe, as though other tribes don't count. In the same way, many tribes have a rule that they mustn't kill people, but people turn out to mean only others of your own tribe. Killing members of other tribes is just fine. Here's a typical origin myth from a group of Tasmanian Aborigines. A god called Moini was defeated by a rival god called Dromedina in a terrible battle up in the stars. Moini fell out of the stars down to Tasmania to die. Before he died, he wanted to give a last blessing to his final resting place, so he decided to create humans. But he was in such a hurry, knowing he was dying, that he forgot to give them knees, and no doubt distracted by his flight, he absent-mindedly gave them big tails like a kangaroo, which means they couldn't sit down. Then he died. The people hated having kangaroo tails and no knees, and they cried out to the heavens for help. The mighty Dromedina, who was still rolling around the sky on his victory parade, heard their cry and came down to Tasmania to see what the matter was. He took pity on the people, gave them mandible knee, and cut off their inconvenient kangaroo tails, so they could all sit down and rest, and they lived happily ever after. Quite often we meet different versions of the same myth. That's not surprising, because people often change details while telling tales around the campfire, so local versions of the stories drift apart. In a different telling of this Tasmanian myth, Moni created a first man called Palaba. Up in the sky, Palaba couldn't sit down because he had a tail like a kangaroo and bendable knees. As before, the rival star god Demeter came to the rescue. He gave Palaba profanity and cut off his tail, healing the wound with grease. Palaba then came down to Tasmania, walking along the sky road, the Milky Way. The Hebrew tribes of the Middle East had only a single god, whom they regarded as superior to the gods of rival tribes. He had various names, none of which they were allowed to say. He made the first man out of dust and called him Adam, which just means man. He deliberately made Adam like himself. Indeed, most of the gods of history were portrayed as men, or sometimes women, often of giant size and always with supernatural powers. The god placed Adam in a beautiful garden called Eden, filled with trees, whose fruit Adam was encouraged to eat. with one exception. This forbidden tree was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God left Adam in no doubt that he must never eat its fruit. So God then realized that Adam might be lonely all by himself and wanted to do something about it. And this point, as you read the story of Dromedary and Moby, there are two versions of the myth, both found in the biblical book of Genesis. In the more colorful version, the God made all the animals as Adam's helpers, then decided that there was still something missing, a woman. So he gave Adam a general anesthetic, cut him open, removed one lip, and stitched him up again. Then he grew a woman from the lip, rather as you grow a flower from a cutting. He named her Eve and presented her to Adam as his wife. Unfortunately, there was a wicked snake in the garden who approached Eve and persuaded her to give Adam the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve ate the fruit and promptly acquired the knowledge that they were naked. This impressed them, and they made themselves aprons out of pig leaves. When the God noticed this, he was furious with them for eating the fruit and acquiring knowledge, losing their innocence, I suppose. He threw them out of the garden and condemned them and all their descendants to a life of hardship and pain. To this day, the story of Adam's and Eve's terrible disobedience is still taken seriously by many people under the name of origin sin. Some people even believe we have all inherited this original sin from Adam, although many of them admit that Adam never actually existed and share in his guilt. The Norse people of Scandinavia, famous of Viking seafarers, had lots of gods as the Greeks and Romans did. The name of their chief god was Odin, sometimes called Wotan or Woden, from which we get our Wednesday. Thursday come from another Norse god, Thor, the god of thunder, which he made with his mighty hammer. One day, Odin was walking along the seashore with his brothers, who were also gods, and they came upon two tree trunks. One of these two tree trunks they turned into the first man, whom they called Ask, and the other they turned into the first woman, naming her Embla. Having created the bodies of the first man and first woman, he, the brother gods, then gave them the breath of life, followed by conscience, faith, and the gift of speech. Why tree trunks? I wonder. Why not icicles or sand dunes? Isn't it fascinating to wonder who made such stories up and why? Presumably, the original inventors of all these myths knew they were fiction at the moment when they made them up. Or do you think many different people came up with different parts of these stories at different time and in different place, and other people later put them together, perhaps changing some of them without realizing that the various bits were originally just made up? Stories are fun, and we all love repeating them, but when we hear a colorful story, whether it's an ancient myth or a modern urban legend whizzing around the internet, it's also worth stopping to ask whether it or any part of it is true. So let's ask ourselves that question. Who was the first person? And take a look at the true scientific answer. Who was the first person really? This may surprise you, but there never was a first person. Because every person had to have a parent, and those parents had to be first people too. Same with rabbits. There never was a first rabbit. Never was a first crocodile. Never the first dragonfly. Every creature ever born belongs to the same species as its parent, with perhaps a very small number of exceptions, which I shall ignore here. So, that must mean that every creature ever born belongs to the same species as its grandparent, and its great-grandparents, and its great-great-grandparents, and so on forever. Forever? Well, no, it's not as simple as that. This is going to need a bit of explaining, and I'll begin with a thought experiment. A thought experiment is an experiment in your imagination. What you are going to imagine is not literally possible because it takes us way, way back in time, long before you were born. But imagining it teaches us something important. So here is our thought experiment. All you have to do is imagine yourself following the instructions. Find a picture of yourself. Now take a picture of your father and place it on top. Then find a picture of his father, your grandfather. Then place on top of that the picture of your grandfather's father, your great-grandfather. You may not have ever met any of your great-grandfathers. I never met any of mine, but I know that one was a country schoolmaster, one a country doctor, and a forester in British India, and one of lawyer greedy for crib, who died rock climbing in old age. Still, even if you don't know what your father's father looked like, you can imagine him as a sort of shadowy figure, perhaps a fading brown photograph in a red frame. Now, do the same thing with his father, your great-great-grandfather, and just carry on filing the picture on top of each other, going back through more and more great-great-great. You can go on doing this even before photography was invented. This is a thought experiment after all. How many grades do we need for our thought experiment? Oh, a mere 185 million or so will do nicely. Mere? Mere? It isn't easy to imagine a file of 185 million pictures. How high would it be? Well, if each picture was printed as a normal picture postcard, 185 million pictures would form a tower about 200 to 220,000 feet high. That's more than a 180 New York skyscrapers standing on top of each other, too tall to climb, even if it didn't fall over, which it would. So, let's tip it safely on each side and pack the pictures along the length of a single bookshelf. How long is the bookshelf? About 40 miles. The near end of the bookshelf has the picture of you. The far end has a picture of your 185 million great grandfather. What did he look like? As an old man, was whippy hair and white side whiskers? A caveman, leopard skin? Forget any such thought. We don't know exactly what he looked like, but fossils give us a pretty good idea. Believe it or not, your 185 million great-grandfather was a fish. So, was your 185 million great-grandfather, which is just as well, or They couldn't have mated with each other, and you wouldn't be here. Let's now talk about our 40-mile bookshelves, pulling pictures off it one by one to have a look at them. Every picture shows a crate belongs to the same species as the picture on on either side of it. Everyone looks just like its neighbors in the line, or at least as much alike as any man looks like his father and his son. Yet, if we walk steadily from one end of the bookshelf to the other, we will see a woman at one and a fish at the other, and lots of other interesting grandparents in between, which as well we shall soon see, include animals that look like apples, others that look like monkeys, others that look like shrew, and so on. Each one is like its neighbors in the line, and if you pick any two pictures far apart in the line, they are very different. And if you follow the line from human back far enough, you come to a fish. How can this be? Actually, it isn't all that difficult to understand. We are quite used to gradual change, step by tiny step, one after the other, make up a big change. You were once a baby, now you are not, and you are a lot older. We will look quite different again. Yet, every day of your life, when you wake up, you are the same person as when you went to bed the previous night. A baby changes into a toddler, then into a child, then into an adolescent, then a young adult, then a middle-aged adult, then an old person. And the change happens so gradually that there never is a day when you can stay. This person has suddenly stopped being a baby and become a toddler. And later on, there never comes a day when you can say, this person had stopped being a child and become an adolescent. There is never a day when you can say, yesterday this man was middle-aged, today he is old. That helps us to understand our third experiment, which takes us back enough 185 million generations of parents and grandparents and great-grandparents until we come face to face with a fish. And turning around to go forward in time. That's what happened when your fish ancestor had a fish child. Who had a fish child, who had a fish child, who 185 million gradually less fish generation later turned out to be you. So it was all very gradual. So gradual, and you wouldn't notice any change as you walked back 1,000 years or even 10,000 years, which would bring you to somewhere around your 400 great-grandfather. Or rather, you would notice lots of little change all the way along because nobody looks exactly like their father, but you wouldn't notice any general trend. 10,000 years back from modern humans is not long enough to show a trend. The portrait of your ancestor of 10,000 years ago would be no difference from modern people if we set aside superficial difference in dress and hair and whisker style. We would be no more different from us than modern people are different from other modern people. How about 100,000 years, where we might find your 4,000 great-grandfather? Well, now, maybe there would be a just noticeable change, perhaps a slight thickening of the skull, especially under the eyebrows. But it would still only be slight. Now, let's push a bit further back in time. If we walk the first million years along the shelf, the picture of your 50,000 thousand great grandfather would be different enough to count as a different species, as one we call Homo erectus. We today, as you know, are Homo sapiens. Homo erectus and Homo sapiens probably wouldn't have wanted to mate with each other, or even if they did, the baby would probably not have been able to have babies of each one, in the same way that the mule, which has a donkey father and a horse mother, is almost always unable to have offspring. We'll see why in the next chapter. Once again, though, everything is gradual. You are Homo sapiens and your 50,000 great-grandfather was Homo erectus. But there never was a Homo erectus who suddenly gave birth to a Homo sapiens baby. So the question of who was the first person and when they lived doesn't have a precise answer. It's kind of fuzzy, like the answer to the question, when did you stop being a baby and become a toddler? At same point, probably less than 1,000,000 years ago, but more than 100,000 years ago, our ancestors were sufficiently different from us that a modern person wouldn't have been able to breed with them if they had met. Whether we should call Homo erectus a person or human is a different question. That's a question about how you choose to use a word, which is called semantic question. Some people might want to call a zebra a stripy horse, but others might like to keep the word horse for the species that we ride. That's another semantic question. You might prefer to keep the word person, man, and woman for Homo sapiens. That's up to you. Nobody, however, would want to call your PC 185 million great-grandfather a man. That would just be silly, even though there is a continuous chain linking him to you. Every link in the chain being a number of exactly the same species as its neighbor in the chain.